Hello, and welcome to Gloomy Realm. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that lead you beyond the ordinary and into the forgotten corners of the night, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, let your body grow still, and allow the outside world to quietly fade away. Tonight, the veil between worlds begins to lift, where every shadow has a story and every silence hides a secret. So close your eyes, listen carefully, and step quietly into the gloomy realm. Story 1, I armed myself before I even got out of the car. Rubber gloves on both hands, a tiny bottle of Lysol spray in one pocket, a tiny bottle of Purell Advanced Hand Sanitizer in the other. I checked them twice, then checked the motel building through my windshield. It was exactly the kind of place I hated. A $40 a night motel. The kind of place where everything felt touched, breathed on, stained, and forgotten. I stepped out of my car and locked it with the key fob 7 times, like always. Not only because the neighborhood looked unsafe, though that was part of it. I always locked my car 7 times. 1 click never felt like enough. 2 felt careless. 7 felt complete. Then I walked toward the stairs. I did not speed walk. I did not run. I strode. That was what I told myself, at least. Around me, the motel carried on with all the chaos a cheap motel could hold. Bass-heavy music blasted from more than one room, each song fighting the others. People moved in and out of doorways, laughing, shouting, smoking, drinking, arguing. A woman in tiny shorts leaned over the second-floor railing and yelled at someone in the parking lot. A man in a stained tank top sat on the curb, eating noodles from a foam cup. The air was thick with smoke. Not just cigarette smoke, weed smoke too. And something sharper, metallic and ugly. The kind of smell I associated with drugs I had only read about and hoped never to see in real life. I tried not to breathe too deeply. I kept my eyes on the stairs. Before I could reach them, a man stepped into my path. He had a thick beard that went past his neck, and his shirt said "Ready to Die" in cracked white letters. "Hey man," he said. "Can I borrow $5? Just trying to get something to eat." "Yes, of course," I said. Of course, I had prepared for this. I pulled a few bills from my pocket. 3 5s, 3 10s, and 3 20s, arranged neatly by value. I gave him 1 5. He took it quickly. Then his eyes moved to the rest of the money. His mouth opened like he was about to ask for more. "Sorry," I said, already sliding past him. "I need to meet my friend. It's a bit of an emergency." I hurried up the white paint-chipped metal stairs. Each step clanged loudly under my shoes, announcing my fear to the entire building. Behind me, I heard the man call out, not to me, but to someone else. At the time, I did not fully understand my mistake. I had just shown cash to a desperate stranger in a bad motel. But I was too focused on finding room 203. I moved a little faster than before, though I still refused to call it running. I passed doors with peeling numbers, stained curtains, and cigarette burns on the railings. Finally, I found room 203. Thankfully, the area outside the door only smelled like cigarettes. I knocked once. From below, the man I had given money to called up, "Hey man, come down here for a second. I want to talk to you." I looked over the railing. Near one of the support pillars, I saw a foot sticking out from behind it. Someone was hiding. I ignored the man and knocked faster. "Hello," I said to the door. "It's me. Come down here, man," the man called again. "We just want to talk." I knocked harder, probably 10 times in 3 seconds. The lock clicked, The door swung open. A pregnant prostitute stood there, smoking a cigarette. For a second, I forgot every promise I had made to myself before coming here. I had made two. First, I would help Walt in any way I could. Second, I would be a good sport and not act weird about his current living situation. The woman took a long drag from her cigarette and looked me up and down. "Belly on or belly off?" she asked. I blinked. I said. "I'm here to see Walt and Walter." Her eyes widened. The cigarette fell from her mouth. "Oh my gosh," she said. "I'm so sorry." Then she grabbed the side of her stomach and pulled. There was a terrible tearing sound. "Ma'am," I said, panic rising in my chest, "you do not have to do that. Ma'am, what are you doing?" For one wild second, I considered running back downstairs and asking the men near the pillar for help, which shows how badly my brain had stopped working. The woman pulled the belly off completely and tossed it aside. It was fake, a strapped-on piece of plastic. She gave me an embarrassed shrug. "Sorry," she said. "We serve some real freaks here. You've got to have a specialty if you want to make money." I swallowed hard and forced down the urge to vomit. I remembered my promise. I would not be weird. "I know this must be tough for you," she said. "You weren't supposed to see that. I'm Walt's sister, Whitney. He said you were coming Friday." I pulled off one glove and offered her my hand. She looked surprised, then shook it carefully. "It is Friday," I said. "I'm Raven, by the way." Whitney turned her head toward the room and yelled at a lump of blankets on the far bed. "Walt," she shouted. "It's Friday." From under the covers, my old friend groaned. "No way," Walt said, his voice thick with sleep. Whitney picked up the fake belly, lifted it over her head, and threw it at him. "Yes, Walt," she said. "We need to clean up." Walt groaned again and did not move. Whitney rushed inside, grabbed a metal bat from beside the bed, and raised it over him. "Get up and stop embarrassing me," she whispered through clenched teeth. "No," Walt said from under the covers. "I'm sleepy." "Walt, I will beat your head in. I swear to God." "No, you won't. You love me." Whitney let out a sharp, frustrated scream, then lowered the bat and put it back where it had been. A moment later, she returned with a container of bright yellow cleaning wipes. When she started wiping the doorknob, an audible sigh of relief escaped me. I wished it had not. Whitney noticed. "I'm sorry our place isn't cleaner," she said. "Walt told me you're really particular about cleanliness. Did you ever get tested for OCD?" Walter. I kept my face still. There was nothing wrong with liking clean spaces. There was nothing wrong with wanting order. There was nothing wrong with not wanting to touch motel surfaces that had been touched by hundreds of unknown hands. Walt, however, clearly thought something was wrong with me. "No," I said. "It's cool if you have it," Whitney said quickly. "No problem. I'm going to school to be a psychologist." "Oh," I said. It came out too surprised. I regretted it instantly. Whitney noticed that too. She dug harder into her cleaning, wiping the already clean doorknob again. "Yeah," she said. "Sorry about all this. We're just going through some challenges. The bathroom also isn't working, but there's one downstairs. We don't live like this normally. It's just how we live for now." "That's not necessary," I said, gently stopping her from cleaning more. "None of this is necessary. Your brother exaggerated. I can make do with anything, and I would love to hear more about your program. My wife has a PhD in psychology." "Really?" Whitney brightened. "That's awesome. Is she coming? I'd love to meet her and pick her brain." "No," I said. "No, she's with someone else." Whitney's eyes went huge. I said quickly. "Another friend, I mean." Enough wife talk, Walt called from inside the room. He was finally sitting up, though still in bed. Enough cleaning, too. If Raven wants to rough it, he can rough it. Come on in, buddy. I did not want to rough it. I possibly did have OCD. The smell of the room and the grime of the whole situation pricked every nerve in my body. The carpet looked damp in places. The air was old and smoky. There were stains on the walls that I did not want to identify. Somewhere under the cigarette smell, there was something sour and wet. But this day was not about me. Walter had just been dumped after a 10-year relationship. He had been forced to live with his struggling sister in a motel room. I had come to support him in any way I could. Also, the man from downstairs was making his way up. So I stepped inside and locked the door behind me. As the day went on, I learned more about Walt's life. I learned that when Whitney had clients, Walt hid under the bed as security. That was now his only job. I learned they had been living like this longer than Whitney wanted to admit. I learned the bathroom really did not work, or at least they believed it did not. And as the drinks kept coming, I learned something that bothered me more than the dirty carpet, the broken bathroom, or the dangerous men outside. Walt was somehow happier than I was. 6 drinks later, sitting on the motel room floor, I started crying. "How can you still be happy?" I asked. Walt took a large drink from his can of Natural Light, possibly the worst beer ever made, and shrugged. "I just take life as it comes," he said. "How are you not?" "Jess is leaving me," I confessed. Walt's face changed. "Oh no, dude." "What? You're such a good guy." "Not good enough." "How did she tell you?" he asked. "Vicky just threw me out one day, said I was too chaotic." Whitney and I glanced at each other. Well, Walt said, "I'm not saying she was wrong." "But what happened with you and Jess?" "She hasn't told me yet," I said. "Oh no," Whitney said softly. "You caught her cheating?" "No, she is just becoming disinterested in me." Walt frowned. "Have you tried not being boring?" "No," I said. "I mean, I'm a bit resigned to my fate. It will happen. The numbers line up." Now Walt and Whitney exchanged a look. "Your life is more than numbers, though," Walt said. "Not really," I said. "We have been on this earth long enough to know how things work. Reality is numbers." About 13% of married women report cheating on their spouses. John Gottman's research found that emotional withdrawal and contempt can predict divorce with around 93% accuracy. Studies show 65% of couples report a major drop in communication quality before separation. I kept going. I listed more numbers, more studies, more facts. I knew my marriage was declining. I knew it would be over soon. I knew I would not be happy. I knew it because every sign pointed there, and numbers had never lied to me as much as people had. Eventually, I fell asleep in misery. I woke to footsteps inside the room. For a few seconds, I did not move. My head was heavy from the drinks. My mouth tasted sour. The room was dark, except for weak light leaking around the curtains. Walter was gone. Whitney was gone. The metal bat that had been leaning against the wall was gone. "Hello?" I asked the room. "Hello," a voice answered. It was not Walter. It was not Whitney. "Who's that?" I whispered. "Hey, can you open the door?" Another voice asked. It came from the same direction. Not the front door, the bathroom door. The door they had said was not working. "No," I said. "No, I don't think that's a good idea." "Coming in?" said a voice I recognized. "Whitney? Whitney?" I asked. "Coming in?" she repeated. I sat up slowly. How many people were in the bathroom? "Coming in," she said again. Or maybe she was saying, "Come on in." I could not tell. I stumbled through the darkness toward the bathroom door. The room tilted slightly around me. I was still drunk enough for everything to feel soft at the edges. I reached for the bathroom doorknob. It was warm. "What are you saying, Whitney?" I asked. "This is Raven." "Coming in," she said again. This time, I heard it clearly. She was saying coming in. Her pitch did not change. Her tone did not change. It sounded exactly the same each time, like a recording. "Whitney," I said, "if you want me to come in, you need to say something different." There was silence. Then, Walt's voice came from behind the door. "Need you." The words were broken, full of pauses, full of pain. I opened the door, because that was why I was there, to help my friend. And honestly, I had done a terrible job so far. Still fuzzy from the alcohol, I stepped inside. But it was not a bathroom. It was an ugly room that should not have fit inside the motel. A maze of white walls, yellow floors, and broken glass. The air was warm and wet. The carpet under my foot gave way with a soft squish. I stepped forward. "Hello?" I called. "Hello," someone answered. Maybe a new voice. "I'm looking for my friend," I said. "Have you seen him?" "Ah, come on," Walt's voice said from somewhere nearby. What's the worst that could happen? I could not see him, but I heard him clearly enough. I hurried forward. A wall of yellow seemed to jump out in front of me. I bounced off it, cursed, and turned into a wider space. "I'm coming," I called. "I've got it," Walt said. "Hey, Whitney, I can handle it." "Walt, do you hear me?" I shouted. A small white light flashed beside me, just outside the edge of my vision. I turned toward it. It was gone. I pulled out my phone, thinking maybe the flash had been a notification. No signal. Of course. Still, fear had not fully reached me yet. At first, it felt almost like an adventure, a moment away from the tight, exhausting structure of my normal life. No clean home. No marriage statistics. No routines. No germs that belonged to me. No responsibilities I could understand. This was not my world. Not my dirt. Not my crime. Not my worry. The white light appeared again beside me. This time, I ran. I dared it to keep up. And for a few seconds, I felt strangely free. When was the last time I had run like that? I jogged sometimes, of course. A steady pace. A reasonable pace. A safe pace. 9 minutes and 35 seconds per mile in a 3-mile race, which was standard for my age. But a sprint, a real sprint, with the risk of pulling a muscle, with the possibility of actually forcing air into my lungs until my chest burned. Most adults over 30 never sprinted, and I was one of them. Until then. I ducked under pipes. I slammed my shoulder around corners. I ran past cracked walls and broken glass and laughed until I was out of breath. Finally, I stopped to rest. The light caught up with me. It seemed happy to stay in the upper left corner of my vision, like a tiny sun showing me the way. And I did need the light. Because the path ahead was now completely dark. Pieces of glass glittered across the floor. I thought about turning around. Then I heard Whitney's voice close to me, soft and full of tears, like a worm crawling into my ear. "I don't think I get to be happy." Walt's voice answered, tired and careless. "What?" "Dude, go to bed. You're tired." "I don't think I get to be like you," Whitney said. It felt like a private conversation, something I should never have heard. But I had to hear it. I had to find them. And maybe, if I was honest, I wanted the answer too. I had driven there hoping Walt would still be the same man I knew in college. The man who could laugh through anything. The man who could lose everything and somehow still believe tomorrow was worth seeing. I wanted him to teach me how to be like that. It's a choice or whatever, Walt said. Just do it. That's so stupid, Whitney snapped. You never helped me with anything. Whitney, Walter, she said. My life sucks. So does mine. So how do you do it? Do what? Be happy. Walt took a deep breath. I held mine. I stood there in the dark, waiting for the answer like it could save me. You just have to let go, Walt said. The light dropped. It moved like a lizard down the wall and stopped near my hip. It was not just a light. It had a body made of blackness. Or maybe it had no body at all. Its eyes were huge, as big as fists, glowing like stars in the dark. Its mouth was full of shining teeth. The brightness coming from it did not feel holy or safe. It felt like a cruel star leading people toward hunger and death. Its eyes watched my hands. The way an alligator watches food falling into water. I understood what it wanted. I swore it would not touch me. I jumped back, panicking, my arms flailing wildly as I tried to keep my balance. Snap, it bit down on my finger, not hard enough to tear it off. Not yet. Its teeth pressed into my skin with a gentle pulse. My finger rested inside its mouth, burning like liquid fire. I tried to move it and felt something hot splash around it. I imagined my skin melting away in that boiling dark. But the thing was gentle. That made it worse. It tugged me forward with the soft pull of a baby holding someone's finger. I shook my head. I did not want to go with it. Yes, it hurts, I told myself, but maybe it does not mean to. Then the thing spoke in Whitney's voice. Please, please, I want to go home. Please, I don't want to die. Its smile grew wider. My face fell. My heart seemed to shrink inside my chest. Still gently, still with that soft, horrible tug, it tilted its head and pulled me forward. I stood frozen. Monsters do not exist, I thought. Therefore, this monster could not exist. Therefore, everyone would be fine. Then the smiling thing copied Whitney's scream. It copied the sound of her skin sizzling like meat on a grill. Okay, I whispered. I'll go with you. The smile did not stop screaming. It was wet and terrible, full of pain and tears. Stop, I begged. It led me with its mouth. Through the maze, it felt like we were walking in circles. The smiling thing shouted commands at me in stolen voices, voices that sounded dead. As I followed it, my mind drifted back to childhood. For some reason, I imagined children holding hands in a field, spinning in a circle and singing. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. Left, the smiling thing said in a dead man's voice. Left, it's coming from your left. I turned left. Broken rectangular LED lights flickered along the black hallway. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. My fair lady. I was right, the thing said, now using the voice of a sad child. I told them. I was right, but no one listened. I turned right. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. You were right. It mocked in another voice. You were right. Oh my God, I'm sorry you were right. Forgive me. I obeyed. At the end of the hallway, the room shifted. A row of LED lights glowed along the floor, forming a cage around something in front of me. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. Left? The thing whispered. She left me. They all left me. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. My fair lady. And then I saw her. Whitney, at least. I was almost sure it was her. I recognized the pajamas first. Hello, Kitty. Her face was melting off her skull. Her smile, her eyes, her kindness, everything that had made her seem human and alive was sliding down in a muddy mess. The rest of her body looked burned, grilled, and brittle as paper. Small flakes lifted from her and drifted away in a warm current of air. They were not even eating her. 4 of the smiling things stood around her, watching. That was when I decided I did not need an index finger after all. I yanked my hand back. The smiling light bit deeper as I pulled away. Pain shot through me so hot and bright that I thought I had caught fire. Then I ran. I do not know how. I do not know where. I only know I ran through every door I could find until, somehow, I burst back into the motel room. Walter was there. He had the bat in his hands. The men from earlier had tried to rob him while I was gone, and he had fought them off. I told him everything. Walter bawled like a child. He crumpled where he stood, still holding the bat, looking like a dead man who had not realized he was dead yet. I knew what he was thinking. I got up and stood between him and the bathroom door, making myself as wide as I could. "Move, Raven," he said, crying hard. "At least wait for the police," I said. I knew Walter. God bless him, but follow through had never been his strong point. I thought I could talk him out of it. He raised the bat behind him like a baseball player. I stayed where I was. Like I said, follow through was not his strong point. So when he swung the bat at my shins, he did not fully commit. If he had, he would have broken both my legs. Instead, pain exploded through me, and I dropped to the floor in the second worst physical pain I had ever felt. The pain doubled when I landed on the bone. I flopped like a fish, screaming into the carpet. Then I realized my face was pressed into the disgusting motel floor. The carpet had probably never been steam cleaned. I could not see the bugs, but I knew they were there. The fibers scraped against my cheek like short, dirty hairs, and still, I screamed into it. Walter's footsteps shook the floor beside me. For 1 second, I considered letting him go, but I could not. I grabbed his ankle. "You're staying here," I said. He looked down at me. "Let's not do this again, Raven." "Do what again?" I cried. "I'm asking you not to kill yourself." He raised the bat again. "Move," he said, "or it's your hands." "Just leave," I begged. "You live in a motel, Walt. I'm asking you to leave it. Go anywhere else. Do anything else. How hard is that? You cannot be yourself in there." He swung the bat in a wide arc toward my hand. I felt the force of it coming. All I could do was brace myself. But he stopped. The bat only tapped my fingers. "You're a good guy," he said. I loosened my grip. With his free foot, Walter stomped on my fingers. In that moment of weakness, I let him go. "Walter." I screamed. He did not answer. Alone, he entered the bathroom. He could not let Whitney go. Story 2. I needed the money. That is the only reason I went up there. That is the only reason I kept going after every part of my body told me to stop. If I had been in a better place financially, I would have packed my tools, called the realtor, and told her to find someone else. But I was new to working for myself, and I needed the job. I needed the payment. I needed the good review. I needed this house to pass inspection, because if it did not, the buyer was going to walk away, and if the buyer walked away, I was not getting paid. The realtor had made that very clear. I stood in the hallway and stared up at the attic access hole in the ceiling. Then I looked down at my 5-foot ladder and cursed myself. There were about 3 feet of empty space between the top of the ladder and the attic opening. I had brought the wrong ladder. The inspector was due in 2 hours, and I did not have time to drive all the way across town, pick up a taller ladder, drive back, fix the issue, clean up, and still be out before he arrived. So I did what desperate people do. I made a bad decision and told myself it was practical. I pulled the backpack full of tools onto my shoulders, set the ladder under the attic hatch, and started climbing. The townhouse was quiet around me. It was one of those old connected row homes that had been cleaned just enough to fool a buyer from a distance. Fresh paint in some places, new carpet in others, but underneath, the place still felt tired. The walls had that old house smell, like dust, plaster, and years of other people's lives. When I reached the rung just below the top, I stretched up and pressed my hand against the attic panel. Like most attic panels, it was made from stiff drywall and sat loose inside the frame. It wiggled when I pushed it. At least someone had not sealed it with caulk. I lifted it carefully, slid it up and to the side, and opened a square of darkness in the ceiling. The attic above me was completely black. I used the frame to steady myself and climbed onto the plastic cap at the top of the ladder, the one that clearly said, "Do not stand or sit." I ignored the warning because I needed the extra height. The move brought my neck level with the ceiling. I reached up into the attic, grabbed the thick 2x10 framing, and prepared myself. My shoulders were not ready for what came next. I had not done a proper pull-up since high school gym class, and that was more than 10 years ago. When I pulled, fire shot through my neck, back, and shoulders. My tool bag caught on the edge of the opening, and for one awful second, I thought I was going to slip and fall backward onto the ladder. But I kicked, twisted, and forced myself upward until my chest cleared the frame. With one last ugly movement, I dragged the rest of my body into the attic. I lay there for a moment, breathing hard in the dark. The heat hit me immediately. It was at least 20 degrees hotter up there than in the hallway below. The air was thick and still, and it felt like breathing through a wet towel. I reached up and clicked on the headlamp attached to my baseball cap. When the light came on, the empty air in front of me exploded with dust. Thousands of tiny particles floated through the beam like insects. I quickly pulled the rubber respirator mask from around my neck and fitted it over my mouth and nose. The first breath inside it reminded me that I really needed to start using mouthwash more often. I looked around. The attic was larger than I expected. It stretched at least 40 feet from side to side and almost twice that length from front to back. There was no floor, just exposed 2x4 joists almost buried under black fiberglass insulation. The ceiling above was a mess of framing, beams, and shadows. The roofline rose much higher than I expected for a townhouse that looked so plain from the outside. Already sweating, I scanned the area for the damaged drywall I had been hired to fix. Then, I saw it. About 30 feet away, near the base of the shared wall between this townhouse and the one next door, there was a torn section of drywall. Brown paper hung from the edges, and there was a dark hole near the floor line. It matched the picture the buyer's inspector had sent to the realtor the night before. Of course, the inspector had not climbed into the attic himself. He had probably just stuck his head through the access hole, taken a quick photo, and called it a day. I stood carefully, gripping the angled roof framing for support, and began crossing the attic. This was going to be easy, I told myself. Get over there, patch the hole, take a photo, climb down, and get paid. I had gone maybe halfway when I stopped. Something was sticking out of the insulation near my left boot. At first, I almost missed it. It was half buried, and it only caught my eye because it reflected the headlamp in a dull, pale way. I leaned closer and frowned. It looked like fabric, whitish fabric. I reached down and tugged it free. Little tufts of black insulation clung to it as it came loose. It was a woman's bra. I stared at it for a second, confused, then I tossed it aside. There are some things you expect to find in an attic. Old newspapers. Empty boxes, rodent droppings, dead insects, maybe a forgotten Christmas decoration. A woman's bra buried in black fiberglass insulation is not one of them. It made the attic feel different. I turned and looked behind me. The access hole was still open, and a narrow column of light rose from the hallway below into the darkness. Everything else was still. Nothing moved. But my heart had started beating faster. "Get it done," I said out loud. My voice sounded small inside the mask. I turned back toward the damaged wall and kept moving. The hole was bigger than it had looked in the photo. I could see that even from a distance. Whatever had made it had done a serious job. I hoped I had enough scrap drywall in my backpack to cover it. I took another 10 careful steps. I thought I saw something else half buried in the insulation, but I forced myself not to look. I did not have time for distractions. The attic was hot, lonely, and too quiet, and I could already feel a heavy sense of unease creeping in from the dark edges of the space. When I reached the wall, I knelt down and looked at the hole properly. "Holy shit," I whispered. My breathing became heavier. Each breath puffed against the inside of my respirator. The hole was about 2 feet wide and 1.5 feet tall. It had been punched through near the base of the wall, just above the floor joists. At first glance, it looked like animal damage, but up close, that explanation fell apart. There were no small claw marks, no bite marks, no chewed edges, no sign of a raccoon, squirrel, rat, or anything else that normally finds its way into attic spaces. I shone my light through the hole. On the other side was another attic, an exact twin of the one I was in, except completely dark. There was no open access hole over there. No light from the townhouse next door, just blackness and framing and insulation stretching away into nothing. Then I looked at the edges of the broken drywall. The wall was not a single sheet. It was multiple layers. 4 layers of fire-rated drywall had been broken through from the other side. I could tell because the broken pieces had fallen into my attic. They were piled near my knees. Someone, or something, had come through from next door. The edges were rough and torn. Wide scrape marks ran along the paper facing, but they were not small enough for an animal. They were larger, wider, messier. There were no clean saw lines, no router marks, no sign of any tool I would have used. Fire-rated 5/8-inch drywall is not easy to break through, especially not 4 layers of it. A normal person would use a saw, a rotary tool, or a hammer. This looked like someone had clawed at it, dug through it, and then shoved or kicked the rest open. I heard a soft thump somewhere behind me. I spun around so fast my headlamp beam jumped across the attic. Nothing. Only black insulation, wooden joists, and shadows. Still, my heart did not believe my eyes. My hands felt unsteady. Sweat slid down my forehead and into the edge of my mask. I thought of the bra buried in the insulation. I thought of the hole beside me, wide enough for a person to crawl through. I tried not to connect them. I told myself I was being stupid. Maybe some lazy roofer had been working on both units and did not want to climb down from one attic and up into the next. Maybe he had broken through the shared wall to move between them. Maybe the bra had been left behind by some teenager sneaking around years ago. Maybe everything had a boring explanation. Except no roofer would break through 4 layers of fire-rated drywall by hand. I closed my eyes and took one deep breath. "Fix it," I said. "Fix the hole, Peter. Get out." I turned back to the wall and dropped my backpack beside me. I pulled out 2 small pre-cut pieces of 2x4, my Milwaukee driver, and a container of screws. The wood pieces were a little smaller than I would have liked, but they would work. I fastened them across the edges of the hole to create support. between the drywall scraps I had brought and the broken pieces already on the attic floor. I had enough material to layer over the opening. I worked quickly, too quickly. I reached into my bag for the 6-inch putty knife and felt a sharp slice across my palm. Ow. I jerked my hand out and saw blood welling from a cut in my left palm. It was only about 1/2 inch wide, but it was deep enough to bleed steadily. I squeezed my hand shut and winced. Another dull, airy thump came from behind me. I turned and stared into the darkness. Nothing moved. The light from the access hole behind me seemed to call to me. It promised fresh air, stairs, daylight, normal walls, and a world where attics were just dusty spaces above houses. I remembered I had a handkerchief in my backpack. It was not clean, but it was better than bleeding all over the job. I wrapped it around my palm, then opened the peanut butter jar of drywall mud I had packed that morning. I scooped some of the white paste onto the same knife that had cut me. When I spread the mud over the patch, a thin streak of my blood mixed into it. Red dragged through white. Another soft thump sounded behind me. This time, I was sure of it. I held still. Birds, I said, trying to make myself believe it. Just birds. There were birds nesting along the eaves of those old buildings. I had seen a few when I parked. That had to be it. The sound was probably from birds moving somewhere inside the roofline. I finished the patch as fast as I could. Tape, mud, smooth it out enough for inspection. Good enough. Not perfect, but good enough. When the hole was sealed, I exhaled. Thank God. I packed my tools back into the backpack and stood. Then I pulled my phone from the cargo pocket of my pants. No service, of course. Old buildings like this were full of thick materials, lead paint, and dead zones. But I did not need reception. I just needed a photo of the repair. I snapped the picture. The flash lit up the wall for one sharp second. That reminded me I had a second light. I turned on my phone flashlight and began making my way back with the headlamp on my cap and my phone in my right hand. My left hand, wrapped in the handkerchief, grabbed at roof braces when I needed balance. Then another thump sounded. Louder this time. I stopped. My heart beat so hard I felt it in my arms. The sound had come from beneath my feet. I looked down. Another piece of clothing stuck out of the insulation. This one was pink. It rose from the black fiberglass like something growing in bad soil. My hand shook as I reached down and tugged it free. It was a dirty pink sweater. It looked handmade. Plain, but clearly a woman's sweater. It reminded me of one an old girlfriend had worn years ago. The kind with no fancy design but obvious care in the stitching. As I pulled it out, I uncovered something else beneath it. Small pieces of clear plastic. I leaned closer, not wanting to, but unable to stop myself. They were empty cassette tape cases. No labels. No writing. Just clear, scratched plastic buried in the insulation. I dropped the sweater. Then there was one more thump. This one was loud. I shot upright and swung my headlamp across the attic. It took me a few seconds to understand why everything looked wrong. It was darker than before. The light from the attic access hole was gone. The panel had been closed. All that remained were the weak beam of my headlamp and the brighter, shaky light from my phone. My blood turned cold. Someone had closed the access door. "Who the hell is there?" I shouted. No answer. The shadows swallowed my voice. I took a step, slipped, and almost put my foot through the ceiling. I caught myself with my wounded hand and screamed as pain shot through my palm and up my arm. My eyes filled with tears. The vents of my mask shook with the sound of my breathing. When the pain eased enough for me to think, I aimed my phone light toward where the access hole should have been. I could not see it clearly, but I knew it was ahead. Maybe 10 feet. Maybe less. My mind raced from the sealed hole to the clothing, the cassette cases, the thumps, and the closed access panel. I needed to get out. The attic was too hot. My shirt was soaked with sweat. The respirator made every breath feel smaller. I felt like I was breathing someone else's air. I took one careful step forward, then another. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision. I froze. I snapped my head left, shining both lights into the darkness. Nothing. Only black insulation and wooden framing. My lights looked useless in that huge dark space, like two tiny sparks floating in a cave. I took another step. My boot slipped, and I grabbed a beam to stay upright. The access panel had to be close now. I knew the direction. I just had to keep moving. Then I looked ahead and stopped. The insulation in front of me was moving. At first it was only a low swelling, like something beneath it was pushing upward. Then it rose higher, forming a black mound that pulsed and shook. Fiberglass shifted and slid down the sides. Something inside it twisted, forcing its way up from below. I could not move. Two pale arms broke through the top of the black pile. They were thin, white, and covered in dusty black residue. "Oh, Jesus Christ," I whispered. The arms pushed down against the insulation. A head came next, then shoulders, then a body. The figure rose from the black fiberglass like someone climbing out of buried ashes. It was a woman. She had long black hair matted with dust. She wore a filthy white blouse and skirt. Against the dark insulation, her clothes looked almost bright, like grave cloth. Bits of black fiberglass clung to her sleeves and hair and fell away as she moved. For one horrible moment, my mind did not understand what was wrong with her face. Then I saw it. She had no face. Where her eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was only smooth, dirty skin. No features. No expression. Nothing. She looked like a mannequin brought to life in the worst possible way. She stepped toward me. Each step made the same soft, muted thump I had been hearing. Her head pointed straight at me. I screamed and stepped backward. One of my hands still gripped a wooden stud, and that was probably the only reason I did not fall through the ceiling. I looked down just long enough to fix my footing, then looked back up. The woman reached for me. Her fingers were long and pale. Her nails were ragged and torn, like she had dragged them across concrete for miles. Small tufts of black insulation fell from between her fingers as her hand stretched toward my face. I screamed again. She came closer. I took another blind step backward, tripped, and fell. I landed hard in a cloud of dust and fiberglass. The backpack on my shoulders hit first and saved me from the worst of it. My headlamp snapped free from my cap and vanished into the darkness. I still had my phone, but its light had fallen sideways, pointing away. I tried to roll onto my knees. Then her hand came down. It clamped over my face. Her palm covered my eyes and nose with terrible strength. Her fingers pressed into my skull like an iron vis. She shoved me down hard against the wooden framing. Pain exploded through my neck and shoulders. My wounded hand throbbed. The light from my phone faded from view. Everything went dark beneath her grip. The fear began to fade first. Then the pain. Then my body. I felt myself sinking, not falling. Sinking down through wood, insulation, plaster, and darkness. Down into something deep and quiet. The panic disappeared. The job, the inspector, the realtor, the money, all of it drifted away. I felt tired. So tired. The pressure of her hand became almost gentle. I stopped fighting. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I was lying on the floor. Soft cream-colored carpet pressed against the side of my face. For a few seconds, I did not understand where I was. I blinked up at the ceiling and saw the attic access panel 8 feet above me. Closed, perfectly still. My voice sounded muffled. I ripped the respirator off and dragged clean air into my lungs. It was the sweetest breath I had ever taken. I sat up. My phone and backpack were on the floor beside me, next to the ladder. My hand pulsed with a deep burning pain, reminding me of the cut. But when I looked down, the handkerchief wrapped around it looked clean. My clothes were clean too, not dusty, not stained with sweat, not covered in black fiberglass. They looked freshly washed. I stared up at the ceiling again. I thought of that smooth white face and shuddered. Then I looked at the ladder. The stupid, too short ladder. Maybe I had fallen. Maybe I had climbed down from the attic, slipped, hit my head, and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe the heat and dust had gotten to me. Maybe I had been up there too long with the mask on and not enough air. Maybe fear had taken a few strange things and turned them into a nightmare. I laughed, not because it was funny, because I was relieved enough to pretend it was. I was lucky I had not broken my back. That was what I told myself. I had fallen, rung my bell, and scared myself stupid. That was all. I stood, pulled the backpack onto my shoulder, and folded the ladder. My hands were still shaking. I walked toward the hallway and reached for the light switch. Before I turned it off, I looked up one last time. The ceiling above me gave a slow creak. Then came a soft thump. I left the house and did not look back. I needed the money. Story 3. First, I want to apologize if my English is not perfect, but I have been buying abandoned storage units for almost 10 years. Most people think it is like those reality shows on TV, where someone opens a dusty unit and finds hidden treasure every weekend. It is not like that at all. Most of the time, it is garbage. Broken furniture. Moldy clothes. Old tax papers nobody wants. Boxes full of dead batteries, cracked dishes, stained blankets, and things that should have been thrown away years earlier. Sometimes you find something useful. Sometimes you find something valuable enough to pay for the unit. And once in a while, if you are lucky, you find something interesting enough to make the whole month worth it. That was why I bid on Unit 312. The storage facility was on the edge of town, behind an abandoned strip mall. It was one of those places that looked tired even during the day. The paint on the buildings was peeling. Several of the security lights were burned out. The chain link fence around the property leaned outward in a few places, like it had given up years ago, and no one cared enough to fix it. Before the auction started, the manager raised the door of the unit just high enough for bidders to look inside. That is how these auctions usually work. You can stand outside and look, but you cannot touch anything or go in. You have to make your decision based on what you can see from the doorway. Most of the people there looked inside Unit 312 and lost interest immediately. I understood why. There was not much visible. The unit looked almost empty. But in the back corner, partly hidden in shadow, I saw something that caught my attention. A steel safe. It was large, heavy-looking, and bolted to the floor. Safes are always a gamble. Most of them are empty because the previous owner removed anything valuable long before the unit was seized. Sometimes they are locked and cost more to open than they are worth. But every once in a while, someone leaves something behind. Cash, jewelry, documents, collectibles. something they thought they would come back for. That possibility was enough for me. When the bidding started, I joined in quickly. To my surprise, the price stayed low. A few people made half-hearted bids, but nobody seemed very interested. In the end, I bought Unit 312 for far less than I expected. After the auction, the facility manager gave me the key. He looked uncomfortable. That struck me as odd. I had dealt with plenty of storage facility managers before. Most of them were bored, tired, or annoyed. This man looked like he wanted to say something but knew he should not. "There isn't much in there," he said. I smiled a little and said, "Then why are you looking at me like that? I meant it as a joke." He did not smile. He glanced toward the row of units, then back at me. For a moment, I thought he might refuse to hand over the key, even though I had already paid. "The previous renter never came back," he said quietly. I shrugged, because honestly, that happens all the time. People abandon storage units for all kinds of reasons. They move away, they lose their jobs, they go to jail, they die, they forget, they stop caring. Whatever happened to the previous renter was not my problem. Still, something about the way the manager said it stayed with me. As I walked toward the unit, I looked back over my shoulder. The manager was still standing in the same place. He was not helping another customer. He was not walking back to the office. He was just watching me. Unit 312 sat at the far end of the property. The farther I walked, the quieter the place became. The other bidders were behind me now, talking near their cars and checking their purchases. But around Unit 312, there was only the dull hum of distant traffic and the rattle of wind against old metal doors. I unlocked the unit and rolled the door upward. The sound echoed down the row. Right away, I understood why nobody else had wanted it. The unit was almost empty. Inside, there was a folding chair, a small wooden desk, 3 cardboard boxes, and the steel safe I had seen from the doorway. That was it. Still, the safe alone was probably worth what I had paid, so I told myself the purchase was a win no matter what was inside. I started with the boxes. The first box held books. Nothing rare, nothing signed, just old paperbacks and a few hardcovers with cracked spines. The second box held canned food that had expired years earlier. Beans, soup, tuna, vegetables, survival food maybe, or maybe someone had just forgotten it there. The third box was full of photographs. There were hundreds of them. At first, they looked ordinary enough. Every photo showed the same cabin in the woods. Some were taken in summer, with thick green trees around it. Others were taken in winter, when snow covered the roof and the ground. Some showed rain. Some showed fog. Some were taken in bright daylight, while others were taken at night. The more I looked, the stranger it became. Whoever had taken the photos had been obsessed with that cabin. There were no people smiling in front of it, no family pictures, no vacation moments, just the cabin, again and again from different angles and different distances. Then I noticed something I had missed at first. Every photograph had a person in it. Not clearly. Not like the photographer had meant to take a picture of him. Sometimes he stood near the tree line. Sometimes he was half hidden behind the cabin. Sometimes he was so far away that I almost missed him completely. But once I saw him, I could not stop seeing him. It was the same person in every picture. Same height, same thin build, same stiff posture. He never seemed to be doing anything except standing there and watching. That was what made my skin tighten. Whoever had taken the pictures did not seem to know he was there. The camera never focused on him. The framing never changed to include him. No photo looked like the photographer had noticed the man and tried to capture him. It was more like the man had appeared in the pictures without anyone seeing him. I felt a chill, even though the day was warm. I tossed the photographs back into the box. As I did, I noticed an envelope taped under the cardboard lid. Across the front, written in thick black marker, were the words, "If you open the safe, read this first." Of course, I opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was messy and rushed, like someone had written it while terrified. Some letters were pressed so hard into the paper that I could feel the grooves under my thumb. The note said that if I was reading it, ownership of the storage unit had passed to someone else. According to the writer, that meant he was either dead or had finally been found. That was dramatic enough. Then it got worse. The writer said the safe contained something valuable. He warned me not to sell it and not to destroy it. Then he wrote something that made no sense at the time. Whatever was inside the safe must never be taken outside after sunset. If I ignored that rule, a man would begin appearing near my home. At first, the man would stay far away. Each night, he would move closer. The note warned me not to go near him, not to speak to him, and not to acknowledge him in any way. The last sentence was written with so much pressure that the pen almost tore through the page. If he ever reaches your front door, it's already too late. I laughed after reading it. I know that sounds stupid now, but at the time, it seemed ridiculous. It sounded like something someone wrote for an internet horror story. Maybe the previous renter had been mentally ill. Maybe he was trying to scare whoever bought the unit. Maybe he thought the safe contained some cursed family heirloom. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. Then I turned to the safe. To my surprise, it was not locked. The heavy door swung open easily. Inside sat a single wooden box. No money, no jewelry, no gold coins, no important documents, no hidden treasure. Just a dark wooden box about the size of a shoebox. Strange symbols were carved into the lid. I did not recognize them. They did not look like any language I knew. They were sharp, uneven marks, almost like they had been cut into the wood with a blade instead of carved with proper tools. When I picked up the box, something felt wrong. Not wrong in a physical way. It did not shock me. It did not burn my hands. It was not cold or hot. It was just a feeling that settled into the back of my mind. A warning. Every part of me wanted to put the box back into the safe, close the door, and walk away from Unit 312 forever. Instead, I carried it to my truck. That night, I was sitting in my living room when I happened to look out the front window. Someone was standing at the end of my driveway. At first, I thought it was a neighbor or someone walking by. The figure was too far away for me to see clearly. What bothered me was how still he was. He was not walking. He was not looking at his phone. He was not turning his head or checking the street. He was just standing there, facing my house. I stared at him for a long moment. Then a slow, heavy realization formed in my stomach. I knew that shape. I had seen it before. The person under the streetlight had the same height, the same posture, and the same terrible stillness as the man in the cabin photographs. I blinked. He was gone. The next day, I examined the wooden box more carefully. I tried to open it, but there was no obvious way. No hinges, no lock, no seam. The lid looked like part of the same solid piece of wood. It was also much heavier than it should have been. When I shook it, nothing moved inside. That night, I spread the photographs across my dining room table and looked at them again. That was when I noticed the pattern. The figure was not standing in random places. Across the full collection, he was slowly moving closer to the camera. In the oldest photos, he was far away, almost hidden among the trees. In later photos, he stood closer to the cabin. In the newest ones, he was almost directly in front of the lens. I looked toward my front window. He was back. This time, he was halfway up my driveway. I could not move. I just stood there, staring at him through the glass. Then, without walking, he appeared beside my truck. 1 second, he was halfway up the driveway. The next, he was next to the driver's side door. At that exact moment, something inside the wooden box knocked. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. Then 3 more. Then 3 more. My phone rang. The caller ID said unknown number. I answered without thinking. A man whispered, "You took it home." Then the call ended. Every light in my house went out. I stood in complete darkness, holding the phone to my ear. When the power came back, the figure was staring directly at my window. The next morning, I went back to the note. I read it again and again, searching for anything I had missed. At the bottom, hidden under a fold in the paper, I found one more line. If you're smarter than I was, go to Black Hollow before the 3rd night. I spent hours searching online. Eventually, I found it. Black Hollow had once been a logging settlement deep in the woods. It had been abandoned for decades. There were old forum posts about it, mostly from hikers and local history groups. Attached to one post was a photograph. It showed the exact cabin from the pictures. I drove there immediately. The road to Black Hollow was barely a road by the end. Branches scraped the sides of my truck, mud pulled at the tires. The trees crowded close, blocking out most of the sky. When I finally reached the settlement, the silence hit me first. No birds, no insects, no wind. The cabin stood exactly where it had in the photographs. I went inside. The walls were covered with pictures, thousands of them. At first, I thought they were more photos of the cabin. Then I stepped closer. They were photographs of my house, my front porch, my driveway, my windows, my truck. Some were taken from the street, some were taken from inside my yard, some had been taken only days earlier. One showed me carrying the wooden box from my truck. I felt sick. Below the photographs, on a small table, I found a journal. It belonged to the previous owner of Unit 312. According to the entries, the wooden box had been discovered during an excavation in the 1950s. Since then, every person who owned it eventually disappeared. The pattern was always the same. The figure appeared. Each night, it moved closer. By the 3rd night, the owner vanished. I kept reading, my hands shaking harder with every page. Then I heard footsteps above me. Heavy footsteps. Slow footsteps. They came from the attic. I did not wait to see what was up there. I ran from the cabin and never looked back. When I reached my truck, there was a photograph sitting on the passenger seat. The truck had been locked. The photo showed my front door. The timestamp was from the following night. In the picture, the figure stood on my porch with one hand reaching toward the doorknob. The journal had mentioned one survivor. His name was Thomas Grady. I found him living alone in a heavily fortified house far outside town. He had bars over the windows, cameras at every corner, and more locks on his door than I had ever seen on a private home. When he opened the door and saw what I was carrying, his face went white. He recognized the box immediately. He told me the truth as he understood it. The box was not a prison. It was a door. Something existed on the other side of it. Every owner weakened the barrier that kept it contained. By the 3rd night, a trade happened. Something tried to come through, and someone else had to take its place. Thomas told me he had survived. Then he admitted how. He had sacrificed his wife. I left his house horrified. That night, the wooden box moved on its own. I had left it on the dining room table. When I came back into the room, it was in the center of the floor. New symbols covered the lid. They looked fresh, like they had just been carved into the wood from the inside. Then, I saw a sentence that had not been there before. I am close enough to hear you. 3 knocks came from the front door. Slow, calm, patient, the 3rd night had begun. As midnight came closer, the wooden box started opening. There was no seam before, but now the lid split apart like it had always been able to open. Inside was not an object. It was not a creature. It was not empty. It was darkness, endless darkness. And inside that darkness were faces. Thousands of them. They pressed against the blackness like people trapped behind glass. Some screamed silently. Some stared with dead eyes. Some reached out with hands that had no strength left. I recognized the previous owner among them. Then something reached from the void. A pale hand gripped the edge of the box. It had too many joints. The fingers bent in places fingers should not bend. Slowly, something began pulling itself into my world. At that moment, my front door exploded inward. The figure entered. For the first time, I saw him clearly. He had no real face. Where his features should have been, there was only a shifting blur, like smoke trapped under skin. He was tall and thin, just like in the photos. But now I understood something I had been wrong about from the beginning. He was not hunting the owners. He was trying to stop whatever was inside the box from escaping. The box was not a prison. It was a door. And the figure was the lock. The thing in the box forced itself higher. The figure threw himself at it. The whole house shook. Windows shattered. The walls cracked. The air filled with a sound like thousands of people whispering at once. In that chaos, I understood what had happened to the previous owners. They had not simply vanished. They had become part of the barrier. Part of the thing that kept the door closed. Part of the guardian itself. Then a voice echoed inside my head. Someone must remain. I knew what it meant. If the thing escaped, someone else would have to take the guardian's place. I grabbed the box. The world disappeared. For a moment, I was floating in endless darkness, surrounded by thousands of trapped faces. They watched me with pity, hunger, and relief. Then, everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital. Doctors told me a neighbor had found me unconscious in my yard. The police had searched my house and found no sign of damage. No broken front door. No shattered windows. No journal. No wooden box. Everything was gone. For a while, I convinced myself it had been some kind of breakdown. Stress, lack of sleep, maybe something in the air at that old cabin. Anything was easier to believe than the truth. Then I came home. On my kitchen counter, waiting for me, was a single photograph. It showed Unit 312. The timestamp was from that morning. In the picture, I was standing outside the storage unit. Behind me, partly hidden in the dark open doorway, stood the figure. But this time, he was not getting closer. He was getting farther away. At the bottom of the photograph, someone had written 4 words in thick black ink. Thank you for taking my place. Story 4. I work as an investigator on a contract-to-contract basis in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. About 4 months ago, a series of house fires started happening across Oregon. At first, I was not involved in those investigations. I only followed the reports because it is my habit to keep records of unusual cases. You never know when something might connect to a future contract. Back then, all I really knew was that people were whispering about a possible serial arsonist. The fires had strange points of origin, and that was enough to make people nervous. 3 weeks ago, everything changed. I was contacted by both a local police department and a private client about a missing person. Usually, I would never post details about a client or an active case in public, but after what happened, I am not sure any of that matters anymore. I do not know who is real, what records can be trusted, or whether the missing person I was hired to find ever existed in the way I was told. The missing woman's name was Millie. She was 29 years old. According to the paperwork and summaries given to me by the police and by my client, she had been born and raised in Oregon. She had studied classics, worked with several historical education foundations, and was known as a quiet but dependable person. She was not the type to disappear without telling anyone. At least, that was true until yesterday morning. Now, I do not know what is true anymore. When my private client first contacted me, they told me Millie had not spoken to her family in almost a month. That was very unusual for her. When relatives went to her house to check on her, nobody answered the door. Her car was still parked in the driveway, all the blinds were closed, every door was locked. I took the case, but I will admit I did not feel too worried at first. A lot of missing person cases turn out to be misunderstandings. Sometimes people leave on purpose. Sometimes they cut contact after an argument. Sometimes they are found staying with a partner or hiding from family drama. I have learned not to jump straight to the worst answer. Then, about a week later, I got a call from the local police department. Another house had burned. That alone was not strange enough to bring me in. They had arson investigators for that. The problem was that the owners of the homes that burned had all been reported missing months before the fires. The public had not been told that detail because the department did not want to scare a possible suspect into hiding. And now, the newest burned house belonged to the same woman I had already been hired to find. Millie, the police had investigators working the earlier missing person cases, so they needed someone outside to help with hers. I had worked with that department before, so they brought me in. They gave me far more information than my private client had. Background reports, family connections, missing person details, work history, travel records, everything they had. Before that, I had almost nothing. I did not have access to Millie's home or personal records. She had almost no online presence. Her social media was nearly empty. I contacted her friends, family, the museums, and the historical foundations where she had worked. Every one of them said the same thing. They had not heard from her in almost 2 months. The day after the police hired me, I went with the arson team to inspect Millie's house. They had already gone through it once after the fire, but they came back with me to explain what made this case so unusual. The fire had started near the fireplace. That would have been normal enough, except the fireplace itself was untouched. The carpet around it was also untouched. The fire had burned around the fireplace, mostly upward, focused on the walls and ceiling. It looked as if a very hot flame had been floating in the air just above the floor. When I stepped inside the house, that was exactly what it looked like. The dark red carpet in the living room was clean, except for ash that had fallen onto it. Around it, the walls were black and scorched. The ceiling was half burned. A couch, some chairs, a few tables, and a wall of bookshelves near the fireplace had been badly damaged. The shelves had fallen, spilling burned books across the floor. The structure was stable enough for us to enter, so I began searching. I started upstairs in the bedroom. The power had been shut off in case the fire had been electrical, so I tried to open the blinds to get more light into the room. They would not move. I looked closer with my flashlight and found that the blinds had been nailed directly into the wooden window frames. Every window in the room was the same. When I asked the arson team about it, they said they had no clear explanation. It was not just the bedroom. Every window in the house had been nailed shut. If Millie had been afraid of a stalker, it might have made some sense, but even the second-floor windows were sealed. There was no known history of paranoia or mental illness, no police reports, no complaints, no signs that she had been afraid of anyone. The rest of the upstairs was normal. The master bedroom, bathrooms, and office all looked clean and lived in. Nothing looked like a fight had happened. Nothing seemed packed. Her passport and important documents had been found in a fireproof lockbox. The office mostly contained historical papers, notes, and drawings related to ancient Greek architecture and mythology. Back in the living room, I noticed the burned books had not been moved much. I asked if I could look through them, and the arson team cleared me to do so. Most of the books were ruined. Some were no more than blocks of ash. But while sifting through the pile near the fireplace, I found one book that was almost completely intact. It was covered in ash, but when I carefully flipped through it, the pages inside were not burned. It looked like a journal. Normally, I would have turned it in as evidence right away and requested access later. But my private client had stressed urgency, and I knew evidence processing could take weeks. So I made a bad decision. I took the journal home, planning to examine it carefully that night and turn it in the next time I visited Millie's property. I found nothing else useful in the house. Nothing that explained the disappearance, nothing that explained the fire, nothing that explained the nailed windows. Just that strange journal. When I got home, it was already dark. I placed the notebook on my desk over a clean towel and put on gloves before touching it. I did not want to leave fingerprints or on something I still planned to submit as evidence. Then I turned on my desk lamp and began to examine it. The cover was rough red fabric, stained with ash. At first I thought parts of it had been burned, but when I touched the darker areas, I realized the ash had worked deep into the fibers. The spine had 15 black notches pressed into it, spaced evenly from top to bottom like hash marks. Inside, some of the pages stuck together from moisture and age. The paper was old, yellow, and coarse. On the inside cover, near the bottom left, there was a deep reddish-black blotch about the size of an egg. At first, I thought it was spilled ink, but when I looked closer, the lines inside the stain formed a pattern. It looked like a fingerprint, a huge fingerprint. I remember whispering, "What?" because I could not make sense of it. It was clearly shaped like a fingerprint, but it was far too large to belong to a normal person. I wondered if someone had made a stamp from their own fingerprint as a strange way to mark the book. Millie did not have fingerprints on file, so I had no way to compare it. That was when curiosity took over. The first written pages were filled with text in a language I did not recognize. Some letters looked almost familiar, but wrong. There were shapes like English letters with lines through them, all written in what looked like charcoal. Since Millie had connections to classical studies, I assumed it might be Greek or an older script I could not read. This went on for a few pages. Then, on the right page, there were only 2 words. One was written neatly in ink near the top corner. The other was written in charcoal off to the side. After that, the writing became irregular. Some pages had full sentences, others had only one large word. The ink and charcoal seemed to switch back and forth, but the handwriting looked the same. Then I found drawings. They were charcoal sketches, badly smudged. I could not tell what they showed. Maybe interiors, maybe rooms, maybe buildings. The images were too smeared to understand. After those drawings, there were blank pages. I thought that might be the end, but after turning several more pages, I found new writing. It was the same strange script, but the handwriting was smaller and softer. like a different person had written it. The pattern repeated. Blocks of text, shorter lines, then smudged charcoal drawings. Later, I found a section written in a language closer to French. I recognized a few words, like comment, and something that looked like approacher, but most of it made no sense to me. Again, it followed the same pattern. Long writing, shorter writing, then drawings. I wish I had stopped there. I kept turning pages trying to find anything useful. Then I reached a new blank section. I thought the book had ended, but I noticed a spot of ink between 2 pages and turned back. On the top left of the right-hand page, written clearly in English, was one word. Hello. Seeing that word shocked me more than I expected. Until then, the journal had felt distant and unreadable. I had been able to treat it like an object, a strange artifact. But English made it feel personal. It reminded me that this might be someone's private writing. A missing woman's private writing. Still, I turned the page. The next page said, "Do you have a name?" The page beside it was blank. I turned again. The next left-hand page said, "Nice to meet you." Again, the page beside it was blank. The next page said, "Unimportant." That was when I began to understand the structure. This was not a normal journal. It looked like half of a conversation. The written lines seemed to leave space for someone else to answer. Maybe the book had been passed from person to person. Maybe each section was a conversation with a previous owner. I should have closed it. Instead, I took my pen. I went back to the first English page and wrote beside the word hello. Hello. On the next page, beside the question, I wrote, "Yes, my name is Isaac." Then I turned the page. My blood went cold. The page now said, "Nice to meet you, Isaac." I sat there in silence, staring at the words. I knew I had seen that page before. I knew it had not said my name. I tried to tell myself I had missed it, that I had read too quickly, that the name had already been there and I had not noticed. But I knew. With my heart pounding, I wrote my own question. "Do you have a name?" I turned the page. It still said, "Unimportant," that made me slam the book shut. Even though I had already seen that word earlier, I had written a question that led directly to it. It felt like something had looked into my thoughts before I had even written them. It felt personal, like being watched from inside my own head. I sat there for several minutes trying to calm down. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe I had subconsciously remembered the word and written the question because of it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was scaring myself. Eventually, I opened the book again. The next page said, "Where are you?" I ignored that and wrote, "Hello, why is your name unimportant?" I turned the page. That's good. Where's Camille? The answer did not match my question, and for a moment, that actually calmed me. Maybe it was not responding to me directly. Maybe the book was just a strange, prepared conversation. I wrote, "I don't know a Camille. Who is she?" The next page was blank. I turned again. "How has your day been?" By then, I was starting to feel foolish for being so frightened. This felt more like a strange gimmick than something dangerous. So I wrote honestly. "My day was fine. I'm an investigator. I found this journal in a burnt house earlier. Arson plus a missing person. A very unusual situation." I turned the page. "So you do know Camille?" I froze. The name hit me like weight dropping onto my chest. Camille, I had not connected it before because every document I had seen called the missing woman Millie. Her name was Millie in reports, summaries, and family statements. But now the book seemed to know something I did not. On the next page, I wrote only one word. Millie? Then I turned the page. I stumbled backwards so hard my chair almost fell. Written at the top of the next page were the words I had written moments earlier. A very unusual situation. I cannot explain the fear that moved through me then. It was not normal fear. It felt like my mind had stepped off solid ground. The room seemed too small. My lungs would not fill. In only a few words, the case had become bigger and stranger than anything I had ever handled. Every instinct told me to stop, but another feeling pushed back. Something deep in me said that if I ended the conversation suddenly, something worse might happen. I felt I had to leave carefully, politely, like backing away from a dangerous animal without turning my back. With my hand shaking, I wrote, "Where are you from?" The reply came on the next page. Somewhere close. Those words felt like a threat. I wrote, "What did Camille say to you before she left? If this thing, whatever it was, knew something about Millie, maybe I could still use it. Maybe I could help her." The answer was the wrong question. I shuddered. What made a question wrong? What had Millie asked? Had she asked too much? Had that been what made her disappear? I tried to ask something harmless. "What is the date today?" The next page was filled with a strange charcoal drawing made from lines of the same unknown characters I had seen at the beginning of the book. The symbols were smeared and bent into shapes I could not read. I wrote, "I don't understand. Could you write it in English?" The next page said, "Where are you from?" The question was clear, but the frightening part was that it was written in my handwriting. I decided to lie. "I'm from Europe. What about you?" As soon as I wrote it, I realized I had asked almost the same question as before. My anxiety spiked. I turned the page. "I know who you are." All the calm I had built inside myself disappeared. I stopped writing. I left the next page blank, hoping it would move on. That was a mistake. The next page was not writing. It was a charcoal sketch of a street lined with houses. I turned the page. Another sketch. A single house. My house. I turned another page in panic. The next drawing showed the right side of my front lawn. My office window was visible. The office I was sitting in. I did not want to turn the page again, but my hand moved anyway. When I did, something heavy and wet slammed against the window behind me so hard I thought the glass would break. I screamed and spun around. The curtains were closed. Thank God, they were closed. I forced myself to look back at the book. The new drawing showed the view from just outside my office window. In the picture, I was sitting at my desk, turned toward the reader as if I had just looked over my shoulder. Something was outside, and it could see me. I did not know what to do. My thoughts started breaking apart. A voice that did not sound like mine began pushing through my mind, calling me toward the window. It was not just a thought. It was a desire. A deep, hungry pull. It felt like something wonderful was waiting for me if I opened the curtains. Something warm. Something perfect. I stood up. Part of me was screaming to stop. Another part wanted to go closer. My head hurt so badly, it felt like my mind was splitting in half. I walked to the window. When I reached it, I managed to stop myself before touching the curtains. I could hear a faint hum coming from the glass, a steady vibration like a tone too low to fully hear. Then I felt warmth. I do not know how to describe it. It felt like being held by someone you had loved your entire life. At the same time, it felt like burning desert sand being thrown across my skin. comfort and pain together, love and torture in the same breath. The pain brought me back to myself. I started crying. Tears running down my face, I backed away from the window. I kept my eyes on it the whole time until I reached my desk again. When I looked down at the book, the drawing had changed. It now showed me standing in front of the window, exactly where I had been moments earlier. Something inside me finally acted. I turned the page backward. The hum stopped. The warmth faded. I kept turning pages backward, one by one. The sketches moved farther away from my house with each page, as if the thing outside was retreating. Finally, I reached a page with text. It was not the text that had been there before. Across both pages, written in huge charcoal letters, were the words, "Where are you?" That was enough. I closed the book. The moment I did, the headache, panic, and pressure vanished. My body relaxed so suddenly I almost collapsed. It felt like I had barely escaped something I was never meant to see. I sat in my chair for hours, watching the window and the door. I do not know how long I stayed there, but when I finally moved, daylight was coming through the edges of the curtains. I wrapped the book in the towel and carried it outside. Then I forced myself to look at the office window. There was something dried on the glass. Dark, chunky blood. Burned skin. At least, that is what it looked like. It had left the shape of a face pressed against the window. A sagging, misshapen face with pieces of skin hanging off it. I almost threw up thinking about what would have happened if I had opened the curtains. I had a shovel in my car. That might sound strange, but in my line of work, it is sometimes necessary. I drove for a very long time into one of the most remote rural areas I know in Oregon. I found a place deep enough in the woods that I hope I never find it again. Then I dug for almost an hour and buried the book. Some of you might wonder why I did not burn it. Because Millie disappeared before her house burned. The others disappeared before their houses burned too. A string of missing people. A string of fires. I do not think those fires destroyed the book. I think the book caused them, or followed them, or punished people who tried to get rid of it the wrong way. I buried it because I was afraid burning it would make me the next missing person. For a while, I tried to stay away from the case. But Millie was still a person. If she was alive somewhere, suffering somewhere, I could not ignore that forever. Yesterday morning, I called the police department to ask about the investigation. They had no idea what I was talking about. They told me there was no missing person case. No missing homeowners. The fires had happened in vacant houses, and everyone had been ruled an electrical issue. Then I called my private client. They asked how I got their number. When I mentioned Millie, they became angry and confused. They said they did not know anyone named Millie. Then they said their younger sister, Camille, had died from an illness when she was a child. When I pushed for more information, they hung up. I do not know what is happening anymore. I do not believe Millie simply never existed. I do not believe Camille died as a child. I think Millie, Camille, and the others are still somewhere. I think they asked the wrong questions. I think something reached through that book and took them. And the worst part is that I still dream about the warmth from the window. That terrible mix of pleasure and pain. That feeling of being called towards something that wanted me to love it while it burned me alive. I keep thinking about Millie and the others trapped wherever that thing comes from, drawn in like people drowning after following a siren's voice. For now, I am going to sleep. I am done with journals. I am done with strange books, missing people, and houses that burn from the inside out. I only hope burying that thing was enough. And I hope I never remember where I put it. Story 5. I live about an hour away from my school, so I am always the last stop on a very long bus ride. Most days I barely pay attention to anything that happens on the way home. It is just a normal school bus, with normal students, a normal driver, and the same boring route every afternoon. Kids talk, laugh, argue, listen to music, or stare at their phones until they get dropped off. I usually sit near the back, look out the window, and wait for the ride to be over. For a long time, I thought there was nothing special about that bus, but there was one strange thing about it. Every day, on the way home, the bus stopped in front of an abandoned house. It was somewhere near the middle of the route, out where the road cut through thick forest and small groups of trailers sat far apart from each other. The house stood alone on the side of the road, dark and broken looking, with boarded windows, a sagging porch, and weeds growing up around it. It looked like nobody had lived there for years. The strange part was that we only stopped there on the way home, never in the morning. Nobody ever got on there when we were going to school, and nobody ever got off there in the afternoon. The doors opened, the bus sat there for a few seconds, and then we moved on. At first, I tried to explain it to myself. Maybe it was a safety stop. Maybe the driver had to stop there because of some rule. But that did not really make sense. There were no signs, no crosswalk, no bus shelter, and no houses close enough for a kid to walk out from. It was just a lonely old shack surrounded by trees. Still, I never asked about it. I had been riding that route for 2 years, and after a while, strange things can become normal if they happen often enough. The stop became part of the ride. I stopped thinking about it. A few days ago, I finally got the courage to ask the driver. It was in the morning, after we reached school. Everyone else had already gotten off. I was walking past him when I stopped and asked why we always stopped at the abandoned house on the way home. He did not look up from the steering wheel. "Someone does get on at that stop," he said. I stood there for a second, waiting for him to laugh or explain. He did not. I told him that did not make sense. We only stopped there in the afternoon, never in the morning. I had never once seen the door open for anyone. I had never seen anyone step onto the bus. He still did not answer. He just pulled the lever, and the bus doors folded shut in my face. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at him through the glass. Then I turned and went inside the school, but I could not stop thinking about what he had said. Someone does get on. That sentence stayed in my head all day. I barely listened in class. I kept replaying 2 years of bus rides in my mind, trying to remember if I had ever missed something. Maybe I had been looking out the window. Maybe I had been half asleep. Maybe some quiet student got on and I had never noticed. But no, I would have noticed. On the ride home that day, I paid attention for the first time in my life. I sat near the back where I could see most of the bus. I watched every student. I watched them talk, laugh, gather their bags, and get off at their stops. One by one, the seats began to empty. 2 kids got off at the trailer park, 3 more got off near the gas station, a few more left near the edge of town. Soon we reached the forest part of the route. By then, only a couple of other students were still on the bus with me. The road got quieter. The trees leaned close on both sides. The usual noise faded until all I could hear was the steady hum of the engine and the soft rattle of the bus moving over the road. Then the abandoned house came into view. The bus slowed. My stomach tightened. The doors opened. And something got on. I do not have a good way to describe it. It walked up the steps like a person, one leg after the other. But everything about it was wrong. Some parts of its body were too long. Other parts seemed folded in places they should not fold. The way it moved made my eyes hurt, like my brain could not understand what it was seeing. It was shaped like a man in the same way a shadow on a wall is shaped like a man. Close enough at first glance. Wrong if you really looked. And I had never really looked before. It walked to the very front seat and sat down. Then it turned all the way around to face me. It stared at me for the rest of the ride. Nobody else reacted. The two other students got off at their stops and walked right past it like the seat was empty. They did not look at it. They did not move away from it. They did not even seem to know it was there. But I knew. I could not move. I could not speak. I sat frozen in my seat while that thing watched me. Every time the bus hit a bump, I hoped it would turn around and face the front again. It never did. By the time we reached my stop, the last stop on the route, it was only me, the driver, and that thing. I have never done anything as hard as walking up that aisle. To get off the bus, I had to pass the front seat. I had to pass it. I kept my eyes down on the rubber floor mat and forced myself to walk. My legs felt weak. My hands were cold. The closer I got, the thicker the air seemed to become. It felt cold and wet, like someone breathing against my skin. I could feel it watching me from inches away. I reached the front door and stumbled down the steps. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get my house key ready before I reached the porch. Then, for some stupid reason, I looked back. The thing was coming down the bus steps. It stepped off the bus. Onto my driveway. I screamed for my parents. I ran inside, crying and talking too fast. I tried to tell them what had happened, but they did what parents do when they think you are scared over nothing. They got more annoyed than afraid. My dad went outside to prove there was nothing there. And there was nothing there. No thing. No bus. The road was empty and dark. The crickets were chirping like nothing had happened. My parents told me I must have fallen asleep on the ride home. They said I probably had a bad dream and woke up confused when I got off the bus. My mom pressed her hand to my forehead to check if I had a fever. I knew what I had seen. The next morning, I asked the bus driver about it. I waited until I was stepping onto the bus, then asked about the thing that got on the day before. I asked where it went after it got off behind me. This time, he looked at me. His eyes were flat and empty, and a wave of dread moved down my spine. It got closer than usual, he said. My mouth went dry. It follows me every day? I asked. He turned his head back toward the windshield. It knows you can see it now, he mumbled. What does that mean? He did not answer. I sat down in the back, on the side where I could see the abandoned house when we passed it. As the bus picked up the first few students, my heart beat faster and faster. I knew we would pass that house soon. When it appeared in the distance, I gripped the seat in front of me. This time, the bus did not slow down. But I saw the thing standing in the doorway of the abandoned house. It was looking right at me. As the bus passed, it stepped out of the doorway and moved down the porch steps. Then it began walking toward the road. Then jogging. Then sprinting. The way it moved was wrong. Its body seemed to glitch and bend as it ran, like it was not fully part of the world around it. It was fast. Too fast. For a few terrifying seconds, I thought it would catch the bus. The bus was faster, but the thing did not give up. It chased us for miles. I sat there shaking, watching it through the back window as it ran behind us. Then, a few miles from school, it suddenly turned and disappeared into the woods. The whole day, I kept looking over my shoulder. I took corners slowly. I checked hallways before walking through them. I avoided bathrooms empty classrooms, and quiet places. I kept expecting to see it standing somewhere, waiting for me. For most of the morning, I saw nothing. Then lunch came. I was outside near the edge of the schoolyard when I saw it. It was standing on a hill at the far end of the playground, just standing there. Watching, I did not know if it could see me clearly from that distance, but I was not going to find out. I went back inside and hid. I found a supply closet and locked myself in for the rest of the day. It was the first time I could breathe. I did not want to leave that closet. But I also did not want to be alone in the school after everyone else went home, not with that thing somewhere nearby. So when the final bell rang, I forced myself out. I tried to blend in with the other students as we all walked toward the buses. My bus was waiting in its usual spot. I climbed the steps slowly. "Please don't let that thing on," I whispered to the driver. He closed the doors behind me. "It's already here," he said. My blood went cold. I turned. There it was. It was sitting in the back seat. My seat. The place where I always sat. It stared directly at me. Even worse, it was sitting beside my friend Ashley, who was looking down at her phone. She had no idea anything was next to her. I sat near the front of the bus, terrified. I kept looking over my shoulder, waiting for it to move. Nobody else seemed to notice it. The bus pulled away from the school, and everyone settled into their normal noise. I did not know what to do. Then I decided to text Ashley. "Do you not see that thing sitting next to you?" A second later, a scream filled the bus. Everyone turned around. Ashley was pushing herself away from the seat, her face twisted in terror. "There's a thing back here," she screamed. Then the figure moved. Its hand shot out and struck her neck. After that, everyone could see it. The bus erupted into chaos. Students screamed and tried to run toward the front. Some threw themselves into the aisle, others climbed over seats. The driver kept driving, eyes locked on the road, while the thing moved through the back of the bus with horrible speed. I do not want to describe everything it did. I still see it when I close my eyes. The sound was worse than the sight. Screaming, metal seat frames rattling, kids crying for their parents. The heavy, wet sound of something moving too fast and too strong through a space that suddenly felt too small. The back of the bus became a nightmare. Then we reached the abandoned house, the stop where it usually got on. The bus doors opened, and the students who were still able to move flooded out. They ran in every direction, but most of them ran toward the abandoned house without thinking. Maybe they thought hiding inside was better than staying on the bus. Maybe fear made them stupid. Maybe the house was calling them. For a second, I stood at the front of the bus, trying to decide where to go. Then the driver spoke. "He will find all of you," he said calmly. "You all notice him now. It doesn't matter where you go." That was all I needed. I ran home. I did not stop. I did not look back. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they were going to give out. Now I am home. I have locked every door. I have been waiting ever since.